Good afternoon from London, everybody. The conversation will begin very shortly. We're just going to take a moment to let everybody join the call. So good afternoon from London, but I know we have people joining us from all around the world today. So it might be good morning or even good evening, wherever you are joining us from. Welcome to our conversation today, which is going to be looking at how to deploy artificial intelligence in government. And we'll try to give you as many kind of practical tips and insights as possible throughout this conversation today. I'm Siobhan Benita. I'm a former civil servant here in the UK, and I'm delighted to be chairing this webinar on behalf of Global Government Forum that works with civil servants and public servants all around the world. And also, I'd like to say thank you to our knowledge partner today, which is SAS. So, in terms of that topic today, governments around the world are moving at pace to develop and implement artificial intelligence tools. They're aiming to use that technology to drive greater productivity in the work of government and to transform the services so that they are more responsive to citizens' needs. For those of you who are based in the UK, you might have seen today, very topical, that Keir Starmer, amongst other things, was talking quite a lot about the use of AI in government and plans for that over the coming period here in the UK government. All of that said, deploying technology at scale doesn't come without challenges. Existing policy systems and delivery systems can be tough to change. The technology, the legacy systems can struggle to keep pace with developments. And sometimes across public sectors around the world, we just don't have the skills in place to be able to fully embrace new technologies, including AI. So today I'm delighted that we've got five great experts with us here today. We've got a really international, global panel here, and we're going to be talking about things like use cases for artificial intelligence that are already in place and how it's being deployed in the most effective way, developing some of those business cases for AI projects and the lessons that have been learned from those, sharing data to unlock the potential of AI and how to change those cultures and redesign government organisations to make the most of artificial intelligence tools. Our five expert speakers, we're going to get into a conversation with them. So I'm going to pose them a few questions in a moment. But we want this conversation to be as interactive as possible with you, our audience, as well. So on your device somewhere, you should see somewhere on your screen a Q&A button. At any point from now on, don't wait until the end. If you hear somebody saying something you want to comment or you've got a question, please send in your comment or your question using that Q&A button, and we will get through as many of those as we can throughout today's conversation. We really do want to make this feel like a discussion. So I'm going to introduce our five speakers and then we're going to get into that conversation. So I'm delighted that we have with us here today Ian Knowles, who is Director of Analysis at the Department for Education here in the United Kingdom. With over 20 years in government in a variety of senior analytical and data roles, Ian has led and overseen data and advanced analytics transformation and deployment across a number of departments, working hand in hand with digital and tech leads. And I'd like to say a big thanks to Ian, because you might have seen on the website that Susan Ackland-Hood was going to be on the panel today, and unfortunately she was unable to. So I'm really pleased that Ian has been able to step in instead. Then we head over to Canada, and I'm really pleased that we will hear from Jonathan MacDonald, who is an Executive Director in the Responsible Data and AI team at the Office of the Chief Information Officer at the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat, leading policy and strategy for AI. And recently, Jonathan led the development and launch of the AI strategy for the Canadian Federal Public Service, which he will tell us a bit more about in a moment. And prior to this work, he was responsible for setting government policy direction in the space of privacy and data ethics. Then we have a second Ian, so I'm going to make sure that I make a distinction in our two Ians today. I'm delighted we've got Dr. Ian Brown, who is Head of Data Science for SAS Northern Europe and an Adjunct Professor of Marketing Data Science at the University of Southampton. Ian is the author of Mastering Marketing Data Science, a comprehensive guide for today's marketeers. And he's an accomplished speaker and continues to shape the future of data-driven strategies and innovation in data science education and application. Then it's really great that we have somebody not just from central government, from the wider public sector as well with us here today. So it'll be really good to hear from Stephen Russell, who is Director of Data Strategy and Technology at Warwickshire Police, which for those of you who are not from the UK is one of the police forces here in the UK. Stephen's focus is on supporting the force's ambition to harness the full potential of technology, data and AI, and he's responsible for setting strategy, driving innovation and implementing new ways of working during this pivotal time for the organisation. And additionally, Stephen sits on the National AI Committee, which is the body that coordinates police activity on AI across the whole country. And then last but by no means least, and I'm sure there's lots of interest here, given all of the kind of changes that are going on in the United States, I'm delighted that we've got Basil Hyder, who is Vice President and a leader in artificial intelligence at Booz Allen. And in this role, Basil collaborates with cross-functional leaders to align broader organisational objectives and strategies, shaping the civil sector's AI strategy. And over the course of his career, he has founded and scaled multiple startups, led large multidisciplinary teams and delivered AI and software solutions supporting numerous federal, state and local government clients. And he's spoken and written widely on AI and data related topics. So I'm sure you will agree, we have a really stellar panel with us here today. Please, as I say to the audience, take this opportunity to message in your questions and your comments throughout our conversation, and we will get to as many of those as we can before we end our discussion today. But now, without further ado, Ian Knowles, I'm going to come over to you first. And I think my first question to you, really, just to set the scene, Ian, is you sit in the Department of Education here in the UK. So how widely is AI already being used in your department? And what would you say are some of the lessons that have been learned so far in terms of what works and what doesn't work so well in the deployment of AI?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Really looking forward to this discussion. As you say, very timely given today's wider news. So I'd start off by saying, like, obviously, as technology changes over time, this isn't like the start of something brand new. We've obviously evolved from things like robotics and automation, and now AI is the next step on that journey. So there's been a chain of work in the department. I'll touch on kind of a major example we're working in the department and a major example in the sectors we work with, and then come back to the lessons at the end. So looking within the department first, and thinking like the problem statement we come to. So we get a lot of correspondence every month coming to the department, whether from members of the public, from parliamentarians or wider. And this is something at the moment that's still quite, although we've got a robot that does the work already to kind of triage the email as it comes in, store it somewhere and make sure it's easy to assign, we then have a lot of people spend time actually drafting the responses. So this is prime territory, large language model solution to look at how do you start taking all the bank of existing policies, guidance, documentation we've got to enable us to actually automatically draft that first version of the response. Yeah. So there's been a process so far to embed that, testing it out in certain policy areas, and then getting to the stage now where we have a really, really good, really strong first draft. Still crucially, keeping human in the loop. So this isn't automatically generated, we send it out. It's put into the right team, it's automatically generating a first draft, and then you've got someone looking over that to make sure it's got the right things in, potentially just tweaking the odd bit, and then feeding back into the process anything that's not right in that solution. And that's the aim here, to deal with potentially like 1,000 bits of correspondence a month, and therefore taking out some of the manual time people would spend before, so we can focus far more on kind of the value add work they can be doing. And the potential is to take that even wider then, because it's not just then correspondence coming in, you can take that approach to a wider stage. That's kind of a live example of something we've developed and are working on. I'll give a few other just internal examples, but not to the same detail. So we're doing some work similarly on whenever we launch a policy consultation. So you go out and seek lots of views from members of the public, other organisations, and how can we therefore more quickly automate, get sentiment analysis of what's in that, and summarise potentially thousands of responses really quickly so teams can get straight into looking at it rather than having to wait till they've read everything before they can start digging in. And we still want them to read the responses, but we want that early response in. And then, again, to less detail, but to touch on, obviously, we do some work on fraud and error. We're looking at the potential to replace some of the things people do with AI agents. So if you've got a regular request for sort of business support, those are things we can do in that space. We've also recently, I'll come back to this maybe later, we've been piloting the use of Copilot in the department to look at how we can also take out some of the tasks that you can just replace, like meeting notes and summaries, action tracking, that sort of thing. Looking into the sector more widely, and we've been on the journey probably since 2023 of really building up our understanding and evidence of what some of the spaces are where we can make a difference, getting public views on kind of trust about what we can be making progress on. You also want to bring people with us on this journey. So we've had a call for evidence, we've had use cases for hackathons, and then we've looked at starting to produce sort of public-facing reports on where we think we can make a difference. The first major area, and this is working with Oak National Academy, which is an independent body that's been producing curriculum materials and lesson plans, is to look at actually an AI lesson planning assistant. So the aim here, the problem statement is how can we make teachers' lives easier by saving time they spend on admin that they could spend on other things or do less overall. And this is it's been launched in September. I think we're up to about 30,000 users now, and for those that have been using it, they're saying it's saving them something like 3 hours a week. This is for teachers quite a tangible thing, and that's based again off a really large bank of training data of lesson plans, curriculum materials. And that's another really live example of where you can really start to use this to make a real difference to people's lives and allow teachers to focus some more of their time on teaching children in the classroom. So that's kind of the start of a journey.
Yeah.
We're also looking at started since last year, a content store where we can start to think of the materials we can make accessible to others to then build their own AI tools. So it's not just the department doing all the building itself, but how do we enable and support the wider sector to come and do more work in that space? So I'll probably pause there on examples, a few lessons just to touch on.
Yeah.
I'll start with the obvious, like it's the data stupid, by which, one of the common problems you have is you've got a great idea, but you just don't have the right training data or the right access to the data to do it. So having that planned in right from the start. Subject matter experts' time, again, one of the crucial things is making sure that you actually got the person who understands the system you're trying to put a solution into, that they've got the time to dedicate to the work you're doing. And a translator, I'll touch on this briefly, and this is not a new language term for this sort of thing, but too often you see someone really good at the tech side, someone really good at the business side, but you can't actually talk the same language. So having someone who can do that interpretation from both sides has been a crucial step in making some of this work. I could go into more, but I think for now that's probably a good start point.
Fantastic, Ian. That's a really great place to start. Thank you, because I think that will resonate with quite a few people in the audience. So I think AI already being used, as you're saying, in the department to kind of some of those day-to-day tasks to remove some of that. So in terms of creating those responses to the public, regular things that are asked, freeing up time for people to work on kind of the added value, the more added value areas, using AI to analyze and summarize consultation responses, and then things like testing Copilot for kind of writing meeting notes, all those kind of things. I think people will be maybe familiar with some of those things already, but then interested what you're starting to do with teachers on terms of using AI on lesson planning. Really interesting there. Don't know if we might have some people in the audience who have got thoughts about that. And you mentioned the importance of trust. Will people trust this when they understand? I think that issue is going to come up in conversation. And then really good, because we do want to get into the lessons learned. So as you say, the need for good data, quality data, and for that data to be managed and shared properly. And then I loved what you said about needing sometimes a translator between kind of the different people who are going to be working on all of this. I'm sure that will be an issue that comes up as well. Thank you so much, Ian. A great place for us to start. Jonathan, I'm going to come over to you. I did mention that you had been involved in led the work on the Canadian AI strategy. And am I right in thinking this is not just timely because of what's been announced today in the UK, but also you published that strategy, didn't you, last week, I think, in Canada?
Yeah, we certainly did. First, just thank you so much for having me on the panel. It's great to be here and also to be included on this group of esteemed experts. It's really flattering. So thank you so much. Yes, we did. We published a strategy on March the 4th. So it is very new, very fresh. It was around 13 months in development, of which 7 months of that we had earmarked for just consultations. So and that is really one of the keys to the success of that strategy. I'll tell you a little bit about it quickly, and just as a way of sort of framing what I'm talking about here. So the idea was that at the onset we wanted to develop some principles to form this work around. The principles we developed are, there's common threads we see across strategies internationally, right? When we're talking about AI, there's a focus on people, so human-centered, and with that we mean focusing on sort of both sides of the service chain, so our workforce, but then also our clients, understanding that there is, they both have an important piece in whether we and how we adopt AI. So collaborative was another pillar that we identified, and that was because I think, as we're all aware of, AI doesn't really respect typical policy boundaries, and so you see impacts across human resources, across finance, across service delivery, science and research sectors, and stakeholders really interested to be part of the solution as well. And then, not to mention, of course, all the different considerations with international interoperability as well, which is, I think, really germane to the AI conversation. Another pillar we had was ready, so that really just speaks to back end policy and infrastructure readiness, so that we can lean forward into this space, and responsible springboards from our existing work, dealing with sort of a responsible approach that is a sort of a center feature of our policy instruments. Trust and social license really are crucial, and that those are hinged on an ethical approach, and so that is where that sort of thinking is centered. In terms of impacts, I can tell you there's and I'm sure we're seeing it across all governments. There's lots of energy in this space, and what we were seeing is that the energy is leading to individual department level projects pushing forward at breakneck speeds, but not inclusive of the wider government effort, and so there's that can lead to a number of sort of downstream problems of a multiplicity of chatbots or similar type functions that are being developed in isolation. And so the strategy is really it's acting as a rally point to coordinate federal efforts here in Canada, and there's lots of benefits already from pulling these threads together. It's been launched for a month. We've been talking about it for a year, and so we are having coordinated discussions with these key departments as we're all pursuing our slice of this federal AI pie, and doing so, like I say, in that coordinated fashion to make sure that we're being as effective and efficient as possible, but also ensuring that our messages are consistent and our priorities are consistent as well. So that's a little bit about the strategy right now.
Thanks, Jonathan. I'm sure we might come back in conversation for some examples of kind of where AI is being used across different departments, but really good to hear there, as you're saying, some of those things. I think picking up what Ian said about the human-centered approach, so not removing the human entirely from the process. And also, again, Ian mentioned that collaboration across professions, needing to make sure that everybody's connected, also across sectors and with the citizens and the public sector as well. The need for interoperability, both internationally, not just across government departments, and also having your infrastructure ready, so having the data and the systems in place so that you're good to go. And then for the audience, those lessons learned around lots of AI going on, but maybe in silos in departments. So the strategy hopefully helping to bring some consistency to that approach, and consistency around messaging and also priorities as well. So really good to get that big overview, and I'm sure we'll delve down into some of the details as we get into our conversation. Thanks, Ian. Before I come to you, Ian Brown, I just want to take just a quick question for Ian Knowles, because it was based on something you said, Ian, but Donna has asked, how are teachers using AI exactly? I think this is going back to your lesson plan. So, I mean, teachers are probably using AI in a whole wealth of ways, but the particular example you gave was around lesson planning. Am I right?
Yeah, no, exactly. That one specifically is when they're looking at, right, okay, I'm going to teach my history class next week. What's the best materials I can come up with to teach this particular part of the curriculum? Okay, I don't want to have to do this from scratch. This is the tool that can help me basically prepare the lesson with all the materials that others have used before, with the best content. And the concept is then they can focus on actually how they want to deliver it rather than having to spend the time preparing it. And that's based off, say, a really large data set of existing training materials, teaching materials. But yeah, you're right, wider. There's lots of things they will be doing. Obviously, what we're taking the step is gradually working with them on how we can do kind of central support and targeted support, but not prevent them innovating in their own space.
Thanks. There are some general questions coming in, which I'm going to hold for a bit later, but very quickly to Jonathan and Ian, I'm going to take Mandy's question, which is, was there much resistance from ministers on introducing AI? Jonathan, I'll come to you first. How do ministers feel about AI? I know that's a big question, but in a nutshell, are ministers supportive or resistant, or does it depend on the individual minister?
I would say, generally speaking, there was a lot of support in the system for the development of this strategy. At the senior official level, that was really key to bring the departments together. And our minister's office was very supportive, and to get it done in the time frame that we had to get it done, minister's support was crucial, and so we had that every step of the way.
Thanks, Ian.
Yeah, equally, again, strong support of the idea. This is the thing we should be using to make life better for people, teachers, leaders, and so on. Safe, ethical, like again in the same point as that. So yeah, strong support for it. It's not a thing we've run against barriers to try and do.
Thanks, Ian. So, Ian Brown, I'm coming over to you now, and you sit slightly differently because you work with a host of kind of different public sector bodies across governments. I'm just wondering, so you've seen a lot of different ways in which AI is being deployed, a lot of different areas in which it's being deployed. Sometimes people are a bit fearful, but I wonder if you could kind of set out maybe some of the benefits that you've seen from where AI has been used already.
Yeah, certainly, Siobhan, and likewise, it's a pleasure to join the panel today. You're right. I'm in quite a lucky position. I work across public sector, private sector, and also I still work within academia. So I'm seeing this from multiple angles at the moment. And in my perspective and my opinion of the conversations we're having, that there's huge potential for the use of AI in government, but only when it's approached in the right way. And I think this echoes already some of the points Jonathan's just mentioned. I've seen a lot of projects that have struggled to get going because departments have jumped into tech without laying the groundwork, for example, to make this work and deployable. I think the real key, and to go to the title of the presentation, is that you need a structured step-by-step approach to really realize the value of artificial intelligence. And you need to be thinking of that proactively before jumping into this. To get those benefits, and there's a lot there, and I'll kind of highlight some of these, to make them tangible, you need to build them over time. And it's not an expectation you're going to get to them immediately. I think, Ian Knowles, you made a great point around data, right? A lot of this does start with data, and I'll make reference to that. But what I've seen, and what we typically work with departments on, and as I said, both from a public and a private sector, is a few of these steps. And the first step we always begin with, before anything else, is identifying the right use cases for artificial intelligence. I think that's core to this. You need to make sure it's being applied to the right challenges and those where it can have the biggest impact. We talk about low-hanging fruit as a terminology in the UK. I don't know if it translates globally, but looking for those easy wins that AI can be applied. And I think governments that succeed start with these well-defined problems to begin with. And for example, and we're working globally on this, but tax authorities worldwide already use and implement AI to identify fraudulent claims and make more accurate decisions to improve compliance, but also while ensuring fairness. So I think that, for example, is an example that's been evolving over years, and it's not necessarily something new, but AI has been used in that space for a long period of time. But as you move on to that, you need to start thinking about, obviously in step 2, how is this going to be responsibly governed and deployed?
Yeah.
And most departments, and I'm talking about this from a government's perspective, from inception should consider AI governance as crucial. It shouldn't be, and unfortunately this does happen, it's looked at later on when things are built and developed. But AI obviously must be transparent. It must be fair, it must be accountable. And to maintain that public trust, I think trust has come up a couple of times already.
Yeah.
This is crucial. You must think about embedding fairness checks into models, ensuring explainability, applying rigorous oversight from the outside is something other sectors have had to deal with. We work very closely within life sciences, for pharmaceuticals, and financial services, where regulations around this have been evolving for a lot longer around the applications of data and models. And a great example of this is responsible AI in some of the work we've done in the Netherlands to predict maintenance systems for roads and waterways. And that is both focusing on the efficiency gains, but also the accountability of making those decisions. And if things go wrong, who's going to be held accountable for that? So step 2 is around governance. Step 3 comes back to the data piece that I referred to. I think data is foundational for all of this. I think Ian, you said think of the data stupid or something along those lines, but garbage in, garbage out has been a terminology has always been around this area. And AI is only as good as the data that you feed into it. If you want good AI, you need good data. I think that's something that sometimes is overlooked. Public sector organizations must really address that data quality issue first around accessibility, integration, being able to get a holistic view across citizens is important to justify the usage of AI. We've been working quite closely in Belgium in their public health sector, and they've used AI for predictive analytics around anticipating hospital bed demand during both peak and off-peak times. And that really has involved consolidating data that's both offline, so the information that's stored in databases, but also real-time health data. Obviously, the pandemic that we all experienced 5 years ago already now, that improves resource planning and helping to save lives. You need to be adaptable to new data that's coming in. And then as you move into the next steps, I think step 4, we always talk about optimizing, automating, and we've referred to this already. AI is around automation in its essence. You're trying to do things that otherwise would take a lot more time to do from a human perspective. But that data needs to be there. You need to then identify what are those time-consuming processes that could be improved. Where's the efficiency gains? And then how can AI reduce the processing time? I think benefit claims and tax administration and citizen health can all benefit from that, right? Allowing public servants to focus on high-value work that requires human judgment and not the mundane automated activities that AI is really good at. And I think there was a stat I had, I've written it down, that the World Economic Forum by the end of this year has predicted that AI will displace approximately 85 million jobs globally, which sounds huge in terms of displacement, but at the same time, they will also create 97 million new roles. So there's a lot of displacement, but at the same time, opportunity within this as well. And then finally, it's around scaling and innovating. Talking about those low-hanging fruit, you've really got to identify those use cases first, but be able to prove the value out of it, scale it across departments, and then to drive that innovation. And many cities that we're working with around infrastructure projects are using AI already. Today, we work very closely in North Carolina, our home base for SAS, where AI is helping for managing flood risks, for example. But that's scaled to both predictive, but also prescriptive and forecasting of outcomes in the future. So I think all of those steps are key to really getting to some of those benefits, but it is a combination. And actually, none of this would be possible without investing in skills. And AI literacy, we know across countries, is still an area that needs focus on. It's almost like if you invest in AI without investing in skills, it's like buying a Ferrari without a driver, right? You've got this great capability, but no one to guide it. So
I'm sure there'll be driverless Ferraris at some point soon.
I'm sure there will be. And I think, but that comes back to the governance and controls around it, right? But from my perspective as an academic and a practitioner, I do see this as it's important, not just for data scientists, an area that I represent, but for policymakers, for civil servants, for frontline staff, for everyone that's impacted to get that level of literacy. Brilliant. I think is going to be important.
Ian, thank you so much. We've got lots of questions coming in, but I'm going to hold them because I want to make sure we get to our last 2 speakers. But just to say, Ian, I know SAS has done quite a bit of research on AI, and some of the benefits that you set out there are really good, that, benefits for the citizen, for the environment, reducing costs for the public sector, all of those. I'm really interesting to see your 5 steps there in terms of identifying the case, governance up front, the data being foundational, optimizing automation, then scaling up. But in your report, I think some of those things that maybe can go wrong, that can be challenging as well, are useful for people. And we've just shared to everybody on the call and everyone that's registered, we just shared a link to the research that you've done on this, so you can all look at that.
We might come back to some of the barriers later, but
absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you. I do want to come over to everyone who's sent in questions, keep them coming. We will get to those. But Steve, I want to come to you because Ian ended there on kind of investment in skills, and we quite often talk about investment in people, and it's really great for us to have you on the call. It's not often that we get people from kind of the policing sector on our call, so I'm going to start with a slightly different question to you, which is, can you give me a bit of background about yourself and how you ended up in the role that you're in, becoming kind of the expert on AI for the police force?
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, it's an interesting journey, and I guess like many, you kind of fall into these things. So my kind of background isn't even in policing; it's kind of housing and care, and I work generally in data and policy. So there is a link there, I guess. And then I had a stint as director of communications. That was very much a slightly random detour of being in the right place at the right time or the wrong place at the wrong time, depending on your point of view. I think what that did teach me is the kind of sense that data doesn't have truth and the context and everything. And I got quite fascinated in behavioral science, etc., as a link between those two fields. Found myself in policing, a really fascinating place to work. And we Warwickshire had a particularly interesting journey in that we were kind of merged with two forces, and then we separated and we had to build our IT, everything from scratch, but the IT infrastructure. That provided a unique opportunity to build a greenfield environment from scratch, which doesn't happen. And I won't recommend doing it, but it was a fascinating time to be. And they were looking at that point, thinking about where does IT sit alongside data, information assurance, and brought those functions together. And I was lucky enough to then be made director of data. And I guess I'm not a deep technologist, I'm not a coder, I haven't got a software engineering background. So you're kind of trying to look, and I saw, just from following the sector, that AI was coming, and I felt that it was a kind of inevitability to move into it, and kind of took upon myself to go on a bit of a journey. And I suppose the starting point is, if you're doing that, is think AI is a general purpose technology, so it's huge. So what is your angle? I'm a CTO, so but I started with a kind of getting a base understanding, not deep. As I said, I'm not a coder. But I think it's probably helpful for everyone to just have an understanding some of the terms like tokenization, etc. And there's so many free resources. I think that's the difference. You don't have to. There's lots of.
And the reason I asked, Steve, is because I guess a lot of people might be scared that AI is coming and it might be taking. But actually, what you're saying is you can move into that field regardless of the profession you might be in.
Because there's so many. Is it the ethical, the governance? So you don't have to be a kind of deep IT person.
Yeah.
In some ways that helps not being that, but it depends on your field of influence, AI adoption. So I've had an okay understanding of the technology, because as Ian, I think, first said, you've got to be that translator. And so the base understanding is helpful, but there's many ways to do that. And I spent a few months, and I guess there's lots of interesting free resources. I've kind of reorientated my LinkedIn kind of profiles to who you follow. I mean, the big thing is there's so much, you can get a bit of FOMO that, there's an announcement today. I think you start with kind of signing up to lots of things, listening, and then you start to filter down. I tend to, for example, on the way to work, there's something called the AI Daily Podcast, 15 minutes, really useful. It's kind of just perfect. I have a 22-minute commute, so I can get in the car, listen to that. It kind of talks about, and then there's not a need to go and read loads of articles then on an evening, because it kind of covers the kind of last 24 hours in AI. I use that. I've kind of honed down who I follow on LinkedIn and which things I sign up to. So in some ways you can just start really big and then just tighten it as you go. I find that interesting. That person speaks well, because there's a lot of repetition. And then I think the final point is, at some point, just get your hands on the tools, whatever it is. And depending on your workplace, that might be within the workplace. The challenge in policing is such a regulated industry. It's quite hard just to turn things on and start playing with them. So even at home, I've signed up to ChatGPT. Claude kind of gave myself a little of a limit and said, look, you can buy 11 Labs. There's all these different tools. Just sign up for a month, have a play with them. I ended up building an application in Replit. I'm not a coder, and I managed to build an application. It showed me what works, what didn't. And I think the only way you can get comfortable is start using the tools and just having a play within your kind of sphere of influence. So
I think that's a good
tip for people.
Start trying it.
Yeah.
And just quick, because I do want to bring Basil in and then we'll go over to the
Yeah.
audience. But Steve, when it comes to the deployment of AI in the policing sector,
Yeah.
can you just give us a very quick overview? Is it similar to what Ian and Jonathan were saying, that it's used internally, but also are you using it kind of externally in the sector
Probably
as
the
well?
slight difference is, so there's the productivity, which we're all doing, in every industry, there's lots of paperwork. It's not paper anymore, but digital admin. And I think, every organization will have a version of that. Policing is probably lots more than others. I think probably the bigger difference is there's a real focus on effectiveness. So facial recognition, CCTV, trawling. So the kind of, how do you make the police more effective using AI? I guess the one unique area for us is the criminality element, in that, in addition to kind of needing to be good at AI for the workforce, we're obviously competing against the criminals out there, and having to make sure that our technology and understanding allows us to balance what's out there. So we kind of look across three lines: productivity, effectiveness, and criminality. And then pitch AI. I'm clearly more focused on the kind of first two than the last one, but perhaps policing is unique in that we have to understand how people are misusing it to protect the public as well.
Yeah, really interesting. So we can come back to that, I think, in the conversations, but really interesting because I think people maybe on first thought don't realize how much it's being used across policing. So as you say, not just the productivity, but also the effectiveness, using it to do some of the things that you do in terms of facial recognition and CCTV and everything. And then, as you say, you also need the experts that can police the criminals who are using AI for malicious intent as well, so, and criminal intent. So really interesting there. Thanks so much, Steve. We will come back to you, I'm sure, in our conversations. We've got really good questions coming in as well. But Basil, I want to come over to you before we go to our questions. And just to say, again, similarly, I guess like Ian from SAS, you in Booz Allen, you work with lots of different public sector bodies when it comes to kind of the deployment of AI. So from what you've seen, what advice would you give to our audience in terms of what they should and shouldn't be doing when they're thinking about using AI? What's worked well and what hasn't worked so well from your experience?
Well, it's great to be here with you, Siobhan, and with my esteemed panelists. Super exciting, and what a great conversation. I have like a lot of thoughts about what the panelists have said, and I hope to build on some of the things that they've mentioned. But really, I think that the biggest element that usually is overlooked when people are thinking about AI is really the human element, honestly. Because we are now at an inflection point, the ChatGPT moment. We've had AI for the past 30 years, right? We had machine learning algorithms, statistical models, but all of a sudden, when these things started talking and talking credibly or writing credibly, everything changed, right? In the public eye. And even for somebody like myself, who've been in this industry for 30 years, you can't help but think like, this is different. It feels different. It acts different, right? So with this time of unprecedented change, what does that mean? When there's a lot of change, our brains can't really process it. We go back to our reptilian brain. We're thinking, is this safe? Is this not safe, right? So it's the flight or fright response. Some of us who are super adventurous sees that as an opportunity and are pioneers. This is not the majority of us, and want to jump in, try these technologies that are excited. Most of us, right, are either scared or just on the fence. We're not sure. So I'd say most of us are more on the fear-based side or unsure side, if I don't want to call it fear. So really understanding where we live emotionally with this technology is really important. And Steve gave a great example. I'm using 11 Labs and ChatGPT and Claude, right? So what did Steve do? Like, he's not a technical person, he mentioned, but he did training. He played with these tools, and that basically created this protective shield against fear. And then he went on to use Replit, right? So now he's a developer, because now you have this AI agent that can build stuff for you by just doing prompts. It can self-correct. So for the audience who's listening, really, this is the first thing I would say, whether you're in the government or you're just a regular citizen. Play with these tools, because these tools are coming, they're coming in force, and you can't avoid them. So that's really an important component. I would start with that. Now, in terms of, when we talk about public sector and the advice I would give officials to building business cases, first of all, I wouldn't call them AI business cases, because as soon as you said that, you already biased your thinking. Right? So think about the business case, regardless of whether we're going to need AI or otherwise. So that's first and foremost. Second, I would also say that you also have to be careful when you tell people, come give me use cases, that really they need to understand how to solve these use cases in terms of what makes a good use case, what doesn't make a good use case. So really we need, again, going back to the training in terms of how to bring a use case together, how to put it together. And most importantly, specifically when we're talking about government, really aligning these use cases to the mission goals. So if you're in the police, like Steve is, right, he's going after bad guys and criminals. His use case is very different if I'm somebody who's in the education and trying to teach somebody something else, right? So aligning the use case to mission goals is really, really critical. And also build into the use case demonstrable measure of ROI, what I would call soft ROI and hard ROI. So don't wait after you've implemented something and decide if it's successful. Early on, decide what are the measure of success.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna let you.
Basil, thank you so much. Really, I love the way that you said there, understand where you live emotionally with this technology. Some people want to jump right in. Some people are very scared. Most of us, probably me, are somewhere in between that. And going back to, I think you echoed what Steve said about play with some of the tools. I'm just going to come back to you, Basil, and anyone else, any of our speakers can jump in on this, because Rick Doig has asked, which tools would you recommend? Are there any tools you would recommend to people to start playing around with?
I would. There are multiple tools, and a lot of them you can get them for free, and they have versions which are not free. So if you wanna, like for instance, I love Perplexity, which is a search engine tool, which basically can search the internet for you. Yep. Very, very, very good tool, and can also search, papers and Reddit and different things, right? So you can focus the search. So that's one. And then I would say a combination of ChatGPT or Claude. I use them differently. I think the new ChatGPT 4.5 is much better at writing, even though Claude used to be much better, I think. So I think that they caught up. In terms of coding, I would think Claude does a much better job. So these would be other tools. There's another tool that I use that I love. It's just called napkin.ai. I'm horrible. I write a lot. I love to write, but I'm horrible at drawing or creating graphics. What this tool does is you can grab what you've written, drop it in there, and it can create graphics based on what you've written. Okay. So these are some tools that I use quite often. There are a lot more, but these are very quick tools. If you're into coding or you want to learn coding, I would say use something like Cursor. That basically you put a prompt and start coding, or what Steve mentioned, Replit is, I would say, even better if you want your code to be deployed in the cloud and you actually have a deployed solution, not a local solution.
Fantastic. Thank you, Basil. Well, thank you to all of you. I've got lots of other questions. I know I had follow-up questions for all of you, but we've got so many coming in from the audience. And also, just to say to the audience, I can see some of you are putting your hands up, but the way this seminar, this conversation is set up, if you could send in the question, because we can't actually physically see you on our screen. So if you could send in your question using the Q&A, we will get to your question. I'm going to take another one quickly from Donna, and it was to you, Steve, but I'm going to put this to all of you on the panel because I think it's more a question around trust as well and using AI. So Steve, the question to you was, how can you be sure that AI doesn't leak police data? And I'm going to broaden that out then and say to all of you, how can civil servants and citizens be sure that their data is safe if it's being fed into AI tools? So Steve, I'll come to you first. How do you ensure that?
Yeah. I mean, probably the first principle we've adopted is where do you put the AI into the process? So we deliberately kept it more at the back end. So to start with, so for example, we're not using chatbots that interact directly with victims. That may come, but so we've kind of removed it from the operational link between us and the public. I mean, the second and most, you can imagine in the policing, we have very heightened cybersecurity and information assurance. So to be candid, I espouse about AI. We haven't turned on Claude, ChatGPT. None of those tools are accessible within Force. And you probably wouldn't believe the time it's taken to assure Copilot, which has probably been out in lots of organizations for many months and even years, whereas in policing, we're only just assuring it. So there is probably a big risk aversion because we know that we're dealing with the most sensitive data that there is. So there's those protections. And I suppose I adopt, again, like a general purpose technology, we carry that risk every day with lots of technology and systems and processes. I suppose my general view is the biggest risk often in our data is not systems, it's humans and phishing emails. So we're just trying to balance equally that kind of, let's not hold AI to a higher standard than we hold other things. I can never de-risk everything. There's a point when you've got to be both good and lucky with some of this. So but we probably have a much lower risk threshold than some of the organizations that are represented here and in the wider public sector.
Thanks. Ian, we haven't spoken to you for a while, Ian Knowles, so I'm going to come to you. That question about how can you ensure that the security of the data as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And something that balances, again, what the sensitivity of the data you hold is. So you'll notice in my examples, none of them were put next to pupil data, for example. So we're quite careful in thinking about the relative level of exposure we put them in. Also, it's the security wrapper we put around them. So there was some early guidance when people started playing with ChatGPT about, like, think about, even if you're doing it on your own home time, it's like general guidance. What are you exposing by doing it this way if you start playing with these tools? And we basically, in the department, locked down how you can use them to make sure people aren't accidentally exposing things when they're doing it. So it's all in the secure wrapper of how we work. And then any new project we pick up, we're looking at how do we put it in the safe sandbox area or something, so you can make sure we've got the right security wrap around it. And then it's just a bit of that training and guidance to keep people thinking. Just what are you going to think about when you're using any kind of these tools, even if it's, again, outside of a work context, just help people to think. Same thing in schools.
Thanks. We've got lots of questions coming in actually about data. So Jonathan, I'm going to come to you. So you can answer the one about security, but Alvaro has also asked, which I think builds on it. He said, if data is the fuel that makes the AI engine go, how much of the focus for implementing AI is on ensuring data quality and reducing silos for data so that we're sharing data? So is that in your strategy? Do you talk about data quality and sharing data as well?
Thanks so much. Yeah, it's a great question and a great observation. I know there's been a few data analogies that have been thrown around already. I'm going to use another one that I can't claim credit for, but I do love it. It is, we say, in order to have your AI dessert, you have to eat your data vegetables. And so the idea is that this was that pre-work that needs to happen before any serious adoption can happen. Within our AI strategy, we draw linkages to there is an equally important GC data strategy that was just recently refreshed last year. And really, it's really important that we draw parallels and linkages between the two, given their close relationship. And so, data and the data access and the fluidity of data in between institutions in the Canadian system, much like the system in the UK, is a challenge. It is especially as we get into personal information and protected data. So those are challenges that require solutions all the way from legislative solutions to more practical policy solutions. And again, it remains one of the key considerations when we're really looking to deploy AI responsibly, looking at data and its usage, and that sort of bleeds into the question about data leaks. And I think I would just echo the similar or the same comments of my panelists. It's use case selection, looking at the impact of your information and the impact of the individuals, and that whole responsible approach. And that's plug our policy work and our strategy work that's really really foundational to how we approach these issues. So guidance, policy, training, all of those considerations are crucial.
Yeah, and I will come to Ian from SAS and Basil on the question of data security, but just quickly, Jonathan and Ian Knowles, is Menzi Livingston has said, will government provide civil servants with training to use AI tools? Jonathan, you kind of mentioned it there, I think.
Certainly. So in Canada, we have this fantastic organization called the Canada School of Public Service, and their sole mandate is to train, provide training programs for civil servants, federal civil servants. But they do often share some of their coursework with other jurisdictions. There is within that school, there is an entire stream dedicated. It's called the Digital Academy, and you can imagine it is dedicated on all things digital, and that has really been AI over the past 12 to 16 months. And there's more to come. I think there's a lot of recognition that your relationship with AI will really depend on what you do and where you sit in an organization. So training for frontline staff, policy analysts, managers, but not only that, executives who are looking to modernize their business. So looking to identify business opportunities, with AI, and they're going to need, training to really understand how to do that effectively. So yes, training is a very significant component of the future approach.
Thanks. And Ian, very quickly on training.
Yeah, I mean, not much to add to that. I mean, I'd say all we think about every year is it needs to evolve every year to reflect. As you go back a few years, it's like, what is it? What could it do? And now it's like, how in your particular type of job can this make a difference? How do you do it safely, securely? So more and more nuanced modular type training to come, building it. But it's not, there's plenty of training already. It's just taking it forward from there.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. So Ian from SAS, and then Bassel, I'll come to you quickly on this issue because we've got so many questions. We might need a part 2 to this conversation, I think. But Ian, around people's concerns around whether their data is going to be safe.
Yeah, and I think that's an important one. I know great comments already from the panelists on this. I think this is something we need to address, because all of our data is being used in these systems, a lot of these systems as well. And I think there needs to be a stronger understanding of the value of our data that we provide and the usage for it. But obviously, data governance, encryption, access controls are important. But there is also a rising approach and another way to do this that we're seeing departments, and we're working with some departments on this, around a concept called differential privacy and also synthetic data generation, which is using AI actually to take and learn from patterns of the data without exposing individual records. So that's what differential privacy really boils down to. And synthetic data allows the creation of new data that's very similar. It retains the same patterns, so it's realistic, but it's artificial. So it's not our own personal information. And these are great actual foundations to, one, remove some of those privacy concerns, but also to enrich and enhance data sets. A lot of the concerns that will also get exposed are around bias in data and representation within data. And actually, if you can identify where there's missing information and you can enrich and enhance synthetically, we are seeing a lot of organizations, both private and public, starting to explore this to enhance their data. So just putting it out there that there are approaches that are being looked at today. Something we're heavily involved in. We acquired an organization called Hazy recently, who are the market leaders in synthetic data generation. But we're applying that with a lot of organizations that have those concerns around privacy and enrichment of data as well.
Thanks, Ian. Bassel, you were nodding when Ian mentioned.
I was smiling because I was going to mention, differential privacy and synthetic data. So he took my spiel here, and great job highlighting. No, that's wonderful. I mean, the other thing I would say, I think the panelists really covered it all, is really minimizing what is the minimum amount of data that you need, right? That's a sort of security. And there's something also called homomorphic encryption, where you don't know what the data is, where it's obfuscate the model, and you can actually, it's kind of like saying, hey, the answer is 7. It goes in, it doesn't know how the calculation is, but it can get to that automatically without getting the data. So there are techniques from a security perspective in order to do it. I'll tell you, with all these techniques, the attack vectors have become immense because of AI. So we are playing always catch up and on defense against bad actors. They have AI too. And the problem is they have AI that's unleashed. They don't have to follow government policies, privacy issues, and all of that. So the attack vectors have gone so much, and we have so much trust against it. So we can't let the fear of what's going to happen of my data for us not to do anything.
Right.
If we do not act, the bad actors are going to get in there anyhow. So we need to do something.
Thanks, Bassel. Very quickly, 2 people have asked. So Erin and Stuart have asked, what was the name of the tool that you mentioned for graphics generation? Was it Napkin?
Napkin.ai.
Napkin.ai. That's for Erin and Stuart. And on that point that you mentioned about bad actors, So there was a question from Thomas that came in at the beginning. I'm going to put this to any of you who would want to answer it. So Thomas has said, a friend of mine doing an MA has a fellow student who refuses to believe that ducks can fly. When shown pictures of ducks in flight, he says they are AI generated. What's the panel's opinion on the impact of AI on misinformation and the ever-increasing ability of people to dismiss evidence? So is AI being used to create misinformation, do you think that's going to have an impact on all of us, I guess, on society in general? Just very briefly on this one, because he said, will this have an impact on policy development and implementation? I guess it comes back to trust again. Will people trust some of this stuff?
I'm going to jump very briefly on
yeah.
Siobhan, and I would say the biggest challenge of this generation is deciphering what's real and what's not. So yes, it will have an impact even before AI was where we are right now with the arms race. This information was at a pitch level, and it's going to get harder and harder. I'll leave you with that.
Thanks. Does anyone else want to come in on that question?
I will. I was at an event actually within the EU not that long ago where we were tackling this around policy and around. I mean, last year we had a lot of the population of the world were going to the polls, right? And misinformation was a concern around influence in decision. I think AI has no doubt made misinformation much more convincing, but your point, Siobhan, is actually the real challenge here is the erosion of trust. Actually, it's more than just the misinformation that's being provided. I think if people reject all evidence, which is a risk, policy making actually becomes impossible. Right? If people don't trust what they're hearing, so this comes back to my earlier point that governments need to invest in AI literacy and digital literacy. To rebuild that trust. I think this comes through education to a certain extent, and you should be questioning what you're hearing and seeing these days because it is much harder to do that. So there's more of a questioning mentality, I believe, is needed to counter this to a certain extent.
And we had a related question, I think, which was sent in advance, and the question was, how can governments ensure that AI is deployed ethically and equitably? So this isn't bad players externally. This is how can you ensure that as a government you are deploying AI in an ethical and equitable fashion? And Ian, I know you mentioned the need for transparency around how it's. And Jonathan, I might come to you first on this one because you said responsible deployment is a big part of your strategy in Canada. So your thoughts on what assurances can we give people that governments will be deploying AI ethically?
Thanks so much. Yeah, it's it all ties in together. I think about trust the way I think about my cell phone. It's very hard to build and very easy to lose. And so, addressing trust is, to my mind, there's we spoke about the importance of transparency, and that can be an engagement, as well as the ethical approach and the importance of the rule of law. I think there's also room to talk about thoughtful regulation. I know that's not always a welcome topic, but I think of an example in sort of in the food and agriculture business where in products now we've got a nutritional information on the side of every package, right? That we know and trust. And this, I think, is a great example of that thoughtful regulation and getting to that with that in that digital space with AI as this force multiplier. I think is to my mind a great North Star to walk towards. Again, knowing that there are any number of lock and key scenarios that we perennially sort of undergo with every technology. Again, always moving forward with those kind of considerations and bringing it back to end user and building trust.
Thanks, Jonathan. Steve, I'm going to ask you a similar question about kind of assurances about the ethical use of AI, because you mentioned things like facial recognition technology and CCTV, and I think those are some areas where sometimes the public question the use of AI in those areas. So what would you say in terms of the ethical deployment
Yeah,
there?
and it's interesting, and there are differing views. I suppose in the UK we try and we've got the advantages. We work very closely, so facial recognition has been through the court process, so it's kind of been nationally assured, so that 43 forces don't have to have the same debates. I suppose, but I come back to, and I've got no issue, having an ethical debate over AI, but I also kind of do say, are you prepared to have the same debate about how policing currently works? And the fact that a police officer has to spend 15 hours looking at CCTV whilst tired, and if they could do that in 5, what else could they do with their 10 hours? So as long as we hold it to the same standards that we hold humans to, that are fallible, make mistakes, then I'm okay with it. And I do think if the counterfactual is a perfect AI, we'll never do anything. If the counterfactual is overall this a better solution than the current solution, often I think that's a better place. So I just try and pull back. And I say in policing, I kind of have a moral imperative to explore this. We've got officers going out there doing the most human job you can do, turning up in situations that none of us would want to. And then if I bombard them with 4 hours of digital paperwork. So I kind of throw it back to people going, what's the alternative? That we carry on, police officers tired, overworked, not saving people's lives. So let's have the debate, but let's make sure we're not holding AI to a higher standard than we hold the current processes and working practices to.
Thanks, Steve. And there was a very quick question from Katie for you, which was, what was the name of the podcast you mentioned?
The AI Daily Brief.
The AI Daily Brief, Katie.
AI Applied is another good one. They're both 15 minutes every day. Perfect for just consuming what's going on.
AI Applied and the AI Daily Brief. Thank you. Ian Knowles, I'm coming back because this question came in, I think, when you were talking right at the beginning. There were 2 questions from Stefan about your example of how AI is being used to draft responses to letters. And Stefan has just said, can you talk a little bit about how you train AI? I think it's about the training data requirements. So kind of how do you do this? And also, is the technology able to respond to different kinds of letters from different stakeholders?
Yep, happy to those. So on the first one, I mean, the training data sets, basically lots and lots and lots of basically Word documents, semi-structured under certain sets of headings, and the approach to how policy lines to take are used. So that's the basis of the training data. And yes, it can adapt. So again, it's using its understanding of what is in the request to structure how it's going to phrase the answer. And like, we've even got nice little tools about how you can lengthen or shorten the answer or change the kind of amount of information provided based on what the question seems to want. And we'll continue to iterate that, so it's not like an endpoint, but yes, we can adjust depending on the question.
Brilliant, thank you. Richard has asked, this is a question to anyone who would like to answer this. There's a lot of talk about AI replacing jobs. We've heard quite a lot about that. But Richard's question is, it seems to me there is potential for AI to augment the ability of older, experienced workers. So what are the views on the panelists on this? So can AI be used to augment workers, not necessarily replace them? Would anybody like?
I had a response to that, Siobhan. I know we've talked about automation here, but AI is an enabler as well. And I think for experienced professionals to do their jobs better, faster, there is an angle to that. But I actually had a funny instance that I spoke to a C-level executive recently, that they were using AI, and I won't name which one, to translate messages that were being sent from junior members of the team around that they couldn't quite understand the context of, or they weren't appreciating the output that they were trying to get to. So there's a way to actually use it to communicate better in certain regards. And I know there's always the risk that you use AI to help you draft and write an email, and then someone doesn't read it and they use an AI to then synthesize it down to make it simpler. But at the same regard, it does reduce those barriers that certain people may have around communication as well. And I know a lot of students that I work with use it for their resumes and for their covering letters. And actually, it does mean that those, even with language barriers, can get the same opportunities as others in the first instance. So yeah, I think it is important to extend expertise as it much automate expertise.
Thanks. And Ian Knowles, you've got your hand up as well on this one.
Yeah, and sort of it's just about the simple day-to-day tasks it can help people with. I mean, I don't know if I classify myself as old or not. I'm getting there. But I did a thing, again, this was Copilot example, it could be anything, but I had to go and do a set of presentations at not a lot of notice, and using Copilot just to create me the starting slide deck from the source material saved me a lot of grief a tweak took me 10 minutes to tweak, it transformed my ability to do that day's job. And that doesn't need a lot of teaching. And the trick for me is the things that people can just pick up really easily without needing a detailed basis in coding or other backgrounds. That's the real strength of it.
Yeah. Fab, thank you. We have got so many questions coming in. There is a question from James, which I'm going to put to everybody in a more general way, I think. So James has said, I anticipate AI may be used to analyze large data sets to provide evidence in prosecutions, so in courts. Traditionally, court-accredited forensic experts present this evidence, and their credentials are examined, etc. While AI can undoubtedly carry out evidence sweep functions, do you foresee challenges in presenting this in court environments? So this is a particular example, maybe AI being used in courts, but do you see other areas in general where AI may not be accepted in that process? Would anybody like to, are there any areas where you think, no, AI just won't be accepted, or do you think over time it will become credible in pretty much
I think the
policy
latter.
areas?
I mean, we're doing lots of work with what we call the Crown Prosecution Service, because I fully expect in some ways the same way forensics is accredited, that you have to read, there'll be that for anything that we're providing where an AI was involved in our decision making or risk assessment, there will be an element of accreditation. I don't know exactly what that will look like, but I've got no doubt that in the same way there's forensic evidence is never debated, but there's the set of standards that it has to be, and the courts accept that will be in the same place with AI at some point. And we know that in some ways one of the challenges for AI in policing is the courts and the CPS aren't ready to receive that evidence, so we can't use it even though it's available, because it would then not stand up evidentially. So yeah, I fully think it will be regulated when it's presented to court.
And that kind of goes back to what you were saying, Jonathan, wasn't it, about having a kind of level of regulation that then is accepted as the standard that AI needs to meet?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, and especially right now, this is, I don't want to say it's new, but we're still walking. We're not quite sprinting. And so, these, existing business lines with high thresholds, aren't, to my mind, necessarily going to be like the first and most ready adoption sort of program lines, right? It's going to be, but I would never say that in the future it will never happen. I think that is also folly. So it's just a question of where how mature the system is and to get into those more complicated use cases with high thresholds.
Nice. Ian, you wanted to come in, Ian Knowles.
Yeah, just a way of thinking of the problems. So we had some prototype work looking at, this is for internal use of the department, how you could use AI completely to interpret a question someone's asked one of our analytical teams, automatically generate and run the code, pull the answer out, pull out the quality assurance, it then ran and describe it all back to the person who asked the question. Theoretically brilliant. We're not yet at a stage where we would be happy to then send that off, even if we proved 100% that was giving you the right answer, because you still don't know where it's going to be used, where it's going, why it was asked. And so there's a bit about, yes, it could do a lot of the job, but we're not yet at a stage where we wouldn't still put the human back in the loop on that. So,
yeah, thanks, Ian. Just to say, if you've submitted questions and we don't get to them in the few minutes that we have left, I'm going to ask our panel if they would very kindly mind. We will try and answer those questions for you behind the scenes after the discussion is finished. So we will still get back to all of you. But Lula Side has said, I like this question, to all panelists, so any of you can answer this. What fields of study would you recommend for the new generation and younger people now to pursue in order to align with advancements in AI? So what should young people be choosing to study now if they want to kind of fully embrace AI when they graduate, for example? Would anybody like to take that question? Yeah, Jonathan.
Sure. I think, and I think every panelist has spoken to the importance of data in this process, and the field, data scientists anything in that digital space. I know we've got a 30% vacancy across the federal government here in Canada in digital type of workforce, but I would suggest that the data science is a field of study that is would equip you to be ready for employment in this field. once completed. I think that would be my first avenue to pursue. I know there's others. I mean, we talk about the importance of business and business planning, and so getting into some of those into that type of study would also be, I think, an excellent complement.
Thanks. Anyone? Yep, Steve.
I think if I was advising someone, and it depends on what you're motivated by, but I think cybersecurity, if I think about that, I think this just supercharges that, we're compounding risk. And I think people who work in that space will be highly desirable now and in the future.
Brilliant. Thank you.
I would say that I would think about education completely differently in the age of AI. Like, for instance, I'm a computer science major. If I were to do it again today, would I go to computer science school? I would not, honestly. I would, like, for instance, like in the past, let's talk about programming language. Let's call Python as an example. You have to understand, what are the construct, what's a function, what's a for loop, and all of that. Today, if I were to teach somebody, I would say, understand what the concepts are and don't worry about the details of implementation. Use AI tools to help you build these things. With these AI tools, as you see them build the code, you're going to start learning by doing. So I would change the paradigm a little bit. You have an expert tool that can walk with you and give you information how you like it, at the rate that you like it, in the context that you like it. If you're a hands-on person, it can do that. If you want something to be repeated multiple times over time, it can do that, right? So the idea is you have this private tutor on any topic in the world that you can really enable it in order to learn different things. So Steve mentioned cybersecurity. I'm not a cybersecurity expert, but I would use these tools to help me with that, just at least to get started.
Thanks.
Just very, very briefly, I was just going to say, I mean, as an academic myself, you'd think I'd be biased towards data science, and Jonathan, I agree with you 100%, but I think critical thinking is going to become even more important for the general populace. AI is going to hit everywhere, and I think being able to use that approach, whether it's learning history, geography, or any other discipline, philosophy, I think they're all going to be relevant, but you need to see the practicalities and the applicability in a world that fundamentally will be driven a lot by AI applications.
And Ian,
I was just going to very briefly, just for a different shout out, to go back to maths and the core concept of logic, still really fundamental to where we go, no matter where we go. So.
Thanks. So lots of areas there. So very quickly, I'm going to do quick fire questions to see if we can get in as many of these in the last 5 minutes that we've got. Richard has asked, how would you manage the use of shadow AI in organizations? Does anybody want to take that one?
I did see that, so I've got a very quick, I already had a response in my mind for that. I think you really need clear governance policies. We're going through that at the moment. You have to have approved AI frameworks, and this needs to be continuously monitored. A lot of great tools have been suggested today, but these are evolving at some pace. So there needs to be some control within an organization. Otherwise, you do find lots of cottage industries, as it were, appearing in internal departments. So yeah, it needs to have some governance and frameworks around it, I would suggest.
I would just also say, ask yourself why they're having to do that. What business problem are they thinking they need to resolve? Because often that's the critical, and because if they're doing that, they're generally doing it for a reason. And I like that. Why am I causing them to have to go and find something that I'm not providing?
Yeah, that definitely seems to be a takeaway, doesn't it, in terms of all of this, building your business cases. What problem are you trying to solve in the first case? Neil, what do you recommend for scenarios where public sector authorities are looking to build their own agents but are concerned about feeding them into internal documents? Is this more a question around, do you try and build your own, or do you take existing platforms? I wonder if that's more the question that's being asked here.
I mean, you have the option of using small language models that are not exposed to the outside and use your data. Or, somebody mentioned Copilot here on the panel. If you're using, an instance of Azure, it's not going to go out of your boundaries. So there is no, risk in that. So there are multiple ways of doing that, and they don't really pose at least any known risk so far.
Thanks. And then this might be the final question. We'll see how quickly we get. So Dominique has asked, to your knowledge, is any organization looking into AI benefits versus environmental impact? What are the environmental impacts of AI? Anybody?
I mean, I could offer a quick thing.
Yeah.
As part of the process as we look at any business case, we look at a business case for investment. In this case, if we were investing in UAI solutions, part of what we look at is environmental impact. So we will pick it up in that sense. But I think that's only because we have a process in general that looks at environmental impacts rather than it being bespoke to AI.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ian. And I am looking at the time, and we are sadly out of time. I think that may be the most questions we have ever answered in one of these conversations, and the most that we still have left to answer. So to the audience, thank you so much for being such an engaged audience and for sending in so many questions. As I said, for those of you who still have questions outstanding, we will try and make sure that we answer all of those after this conversation, and we will send you our answers. I just want to say a huge thank you. That's been such an informative, which is what we wanted it to be, which is why we kind of called it the step-by-step guide, informative conversation. So a massive thank you from me to our great panelists there. You really did have to draw on your expertise for some of those questions. Those to Steve, to Basil, to Ian Knowles, to Ian Brown, and to Jonathan MacDonald. Thank you so much for giving us your time and your expertise. I think there were lots of takeaways from that in terms of kind of the need to define the problem, the need to have the foundations in place, the need for good data, and then understanding how you measure success and then scale up from there. So all of those things I think are excellent takeaways for the audience. Just to say, we have probably sent a very short questionnaire out to all of you who registered and all of you in the audience. If you could take a couple of minutes to fill that in, it would be hugely helpful for me, because it means that here in Global Government Forum, we can make sure we give you webinars that are of most use to you and have conversations that are of most value to you. So I'd be really grateful if you could take a couple of minutes to fill that in. Thank you again to our brilliant panel and to SAS for being our knowledge partner today. We will send a link of this conversation to everybody who registered, to those of you who joined now and those of you on different time zones who might watch it slightly later on catch up. And we will also be writing an article with key points that came out of today's discussion, which we will share with everybody as well. But it's safe to say, from the amount of interest we had there and the amount of questions, there's obviously a lot of kind of interest in AI. So maybe we will come back for a part 2 of this conversation. But wherever you are today, thank you so much for joining us. I hope to see you on another one of our webinars very shortly. And goodbye to our panel. Enjoy the rest of the day wherever you are. Thanks so much, everyone.